The hum of keyboards and quiet chatter filled the office of Harrington Enterprises, a leading firm nestled in the heart of Roseview City. Madison, a meticulous secretary known for her sharp tongue and unwavering sense of authority, was sorting files when a man walked in, a man she didn't recognize. He was tall, composed, and sharply dressed in a tailored suit. His presence seemed to command attention. But to Madison, it only sparked suspicion. Something about the ease of his stride and the confidence in his demeanor set her on edge. Who does he think he is? She wondered, narrowing her eyes as she leaned over her desk. "Good morning," the man said, his tone professional but warm. "I'm Jacob Daniels. I have a meeting to attend." Madison blinked, her brows knitting together. "I don't recall seeing your name on the schedule," she replied curtly, her voice as icy as the winter air outside. Her hand hovered over her desk phone. "Did someone let you in?" Jacob remained calm, though the implied accusation wasn't lost on him. "I didn't need to be let in," he said simply. "I'm the CEO." Madison froze for a split second, then scoffed. "The so?" she repeated, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "That's a new one. Listen, Mr. Daniels," she said, emphasizing his name as if it were a lie. "We don't allow unauthorized visitors to wander in. You'll have to leave." Jacob took a slow breath, his composure unwavering. "I don't think you understand," he said evenly. "I am Jacob Daniels, the owner of this company. Check your records if you need to." Madison smirked, dismissing his words outright. "Right? Well, if you're the CEO, where's your ID badge? Your proof?" She tilted her head mockingly. Before Jacob could respond, she waved to Martin, the security guard stationed nearby. "Martin, could you come here? We've got a situation." Martin strode over, his broad frame imposing as he looked Jacob up and down. "What's going on?" he asked. "This gentleman claims he owns the company," Madison said with a laugh. "I think we need to escort him out." Jacob held out his ID calmly. "Here's my identification," he said. "It should clear up any doubts." Madison barely glanced at it before sliding it back across the desk with a dismissive gesture. "Fake IDs don't impress me, Mr. Daniels." Martin, emboldened by Madison's confidence, stepped closer. "Let's not make this difficult," he said firmly. "You're going to have to leave." Jacob's patience, though vast, was wearing thin. "This is a mistake," he said, meeting Martin's gaze. "You're making assumptions without facts." "Assumptions?" Madison interjected, crossing her arms. "We're protecting this company from people like you. Now leave before we call the authorities." The hostility in her voice hit like a slap, but Jacob stayed composed. "People like me?" he repeated, his tone sharp. "Care to explain?" Martin's grip on Jacob's arm answered the question. It wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was a deliberate dismissal of his authority, his dignity. Jacob shook free from the guard's grip. "This is blatant prejudice," he said, his voice steady but cutting. Madison laughed again, though the sound was hollow. "Prejudice? You're delusional." At that moment, the elevator doors opened, and several executives stepped into the hallway. Among them was Lauren Hayes, the company's chief operations officer. She stopped mid-stride, her face twisting in confusion as she took in the scene. Madison glaring, Martin posturing, and Jacob standing in quiet defiance. "What's going on here?" Lauren asked sharply, her eyes darting between them. Madison quickly stepped forward. "This man tried to force his way into the office," she explained, her voice confident. "He's claiming to be the CEO." Lauren's face drained of color. She turned to Jacob, her lips parting as realization struck. "Mr. Daniels," she said softly, her tone filled with dread. "Is it really you?" Jacob didn't need to answer. The weight of the moment was enough. Lauren's horrified expression confirmed the truth for everyone. Madison staggered back, her confidence shattered. I didn't realize," she stammered, her voice trembling. The security guard's grip loosened, his hand falling to his side as he muttered an apology. Jacob adjusted his suit, his movements slow and deliberate. "You didn't realize," he repeated, his voice low. "Or you didn't bother to find out?" "I'm so sorry, sir," Madison blurted out, her face pale. "It was a mistake." "I—" Jacob raised a hand, silencing her. A mistake, he echoed. This isn't just about me. It's about the assumptions you made, the way you treated someone based on nothing but your own biases. The room fell silent. Every pair of eyes was on Jacob as he stepped forward, his presence commanding in a way that left no room for argument. You'll need to think carefully about how you treat people in the future, he said, looking directly at Madison and Martin. This company doesn't stand for prejudice or small-mindedness. If you can't uphold that standard, you don't belong here. With that, Jacob walked past them, his head held high, leaving a trail of stunned silence in his wake. Madison sank into her chair, her hands shaking, as the weight of her actions settled over her. Martin stood frozen, his face a mixture of shame and regret. In the distance, the quiet hum of the office resumed, but the air was different, charged with tension, reflection, and an unspoken question. What would happen next? As Jacob Daniels strode away, his footsteps echoing in the silent hallway, the weight of what had just unfolded lingered in the air. The once busy office now seemed frozen, caught in the aftermath of exposed prejudice and humiliation. Madison and Martin stood rooted in place, their gazes darting between each other and the floor. Their usual air of authority crumbled into nothingness. For Madison, the realization hit hard. She had prided herself on her professionalism, her dedication to rules and procedures. But now those very principles seemed hollow, an elaborate facade that had crumbled under the weight of her actions. She sank into her chair, staring blankly at the polished desk in front of her. Memories of her words, cold, cutting, laced with superiority, looped in her mind. People like you don't belong here. The phrase now felt like a brand, searing her conscience with every repetition. Martin, meanwhile, gripped the back of a nearby chair, his knuckles white. He had spent years on the job, following orders, enforcing rules without question. But this had been different. He hadn't just followed orders. He had fueled the humiliation. The image of Jacob Daniels' restrained dignity haunted him, a stark contrast to his own reckless assumptions. Lauren Hayes, the COO, was the first to break the silence. She turned to Madison, her voice sharp but controlled. You do realize what just happened here, don't you? Madison nodded numbly, unable to meet Lauren's eyes. This isn't just about offending the CEO, Lauren continued, her voice rising. It's about what kind of culture we're fostering in this company. If you can't recognize the problem in your behavior today, you don't belong here. The words hit Madison like a physical blow. She opened her mouth to respond, but no sound came. She looked to Martin for support, but his expression was just as stricken. The reality of the situation was undeniable. There were no excuses left to offer. Jacob Daniels entered his office and closed the door behind him. For a moment, he stood still, letting the silence wash over him. The polished desk, the city skyline visible through the massive windows, the neatly organized files. All of it was his. Yet, moments ago, he had been treated as if he didn't belong in the very space he'd built from the ground up. He sank into his chair and stared out at the city below. This wasn't the first time he had faced prejudice, and he knew it wouldn't be the last. But the blatant display of disrespect and cruelty, especially within his own company, struck deeper than he expected. Still, he didn't feel anger, only resolve. He reached for his notebook and began jotting down thoughts. This has to be a turning point, he wrote. Not just for Madison or Martin, but for everyone who watched and did nothing. The ripple effects of the incident spread quickly. News of what had happened reached every corner of the building, sparking hushed conversations and nervous glances. For some, the story was a wake-up call, a stark reminder of their own biases and silent complicity. For others, it was a moment of fear, wondering how their own actions might come under scrutiny. Later that afternoon, an email landed in every employee's inbox. The subject line read, "Mandatory all-staff meeting, a message from the CEO." When the time came, the entire staff gathered in the conference room. Jacob stood at the head of the room, his presence commanding yet calm. The room fell silent as he began to speak. "Today, something happened that cannot and will not be ignored," he said, his voice steady but firm. "What I experienced this morning wasn't just about me. It was about the assumptions we make, the biases we carry, and the culture we create, knowingly or unknowingly. He paused, letting his words sink in. This company was built on the principles of innovation, inclusion, and integrity. If we fail to uphold those values, then we fail not only as a business but as people. Effective immediately, we're implementing mandatory diversity and equity training. But this isn't about checking a box. It's about fostering a culture where respect and fairness are non-negotiable. The room was silent, every face tense with reflection. Jacob's gaze swept over the employees. Mistakes were made today, and while I expect accountability, I also believe in growth. Each of us has a responsibility to ensure this never happens again. Not to me, not to anyone. He stepped back, signaling the end of the meeting. As the staff began to file out, many glanced at him, their expressions a mix of shame and gratitude. In the days that followed, Madison and Martin approached Jacob separately. Madison, her voice trembling, offered a heartfelt apology. "I was wrong, Mr. Daniels. I don't have an excuse, but I want to do better, and I'm willing to earn back your trust if you'll let me." Martin, too, was contrite. "I let my own biases blind me. I know an apology isn't enough, but I want to make amends." Jacob listened, his expression unreadable. "It's not about apologizing to me," he said to both of them. "It's about how you treat everyone who walks through those doors. Prove to me, and to yourself, that you've learned from this." The incident became a turning point for Harrington Enterprises. Jacob's leadership ushered in a new era of accountability and growth. The scars of the event remained, but they served as a reminder, a challenge to build something better. For Madison and Martin, and for everyone in the company, it was the beginning of an unflinching journey toward change.